Let's talk about everything I read in the month of February. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Chris and today's video is the February of 2023 wrap up. Now, I, like many others of my booktube friends here in the community, put on too many books on their February TBR, considering it is the shortest month of the year. I think I put on 11 books on a TBR and I got through 6. So I think 6 is basically my number moving forward. That is the amount of books I'm comfortable with saying I'm definitely going to read within the month. But if you've already seen my March TBR, there is now a priority system to books if I happen to have some more time. So before we jump into my thoughts on what I read during the month, make sure you check in the description box down below for links to my social media and Discord should you want to come along for the ride. Jumping right into it, I've been super lazy with keeping up with my star ratings. I'll put them on Goodreads, but I normally have a separate spreadsheet where I will also keep track of them, and I just haven't updated it for the month of February. So I've just been sort of going on feel of books rather than a rating system or my own rating system for the last couple of months, while things have been a little bit out of control. And I think just for my own brain's sake, that's going to be the way going forward, unless there is a book that I really do need to break down into elements. But my reading has felt a little bit more varied, even though I'm reading mostly sci-fi and fantasy still, in the types of content that's being consumed within those books. So it has been a little bit hard to judge on the rating scale that I had last year, which is purely based around fantasy and what fantasy books bring to the table. So we're just going on the good vibes right now. Jumping into the first book that I finished in the month of February, that is A Closed and Common Orbit. This is by Becky Chambers. This is a very thematic heavy book. We're looking at humanity and what it's like to be human, ironically from an AI perspective, as this being now needs to learn how to be human and how to be comfortable with that. There is a lot of good conversations to be had here. Like The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, there's not a huge amount of plot in these books. It is largely thematic, and Becky Chambers doesn't shy away from the nitty-gritty of the aspects that are put into these books. So I had a good time with it, very easy to listen to. But if you're someone who needs more plot rather than just a story about ideals, then this series may not be for you. And it also depends on what thematics that you're looking for within a story. But I had a great time with it. I really liked the first book. I liked this one less than I liked the first book because there was more of a plot in book one, and it was more to do with acceptance of gender and sexuality and things like that, things that are close to my heart. But I think this book really did touch on some things that, neurodivergence would really appreciate being explored. So I had a good time with it. I think I gave this one a 3.5 or a 4 from memory, don't quote me on that, but it was really easy. The audio was great, very easy to listen to, and easy to listen to on a faster speed as well if you're looking for something quick and easy to get through, but very, very enjoyable. The one criticism that I was talking to my friend Ryan, who I read this with, was that the protagonists tend to be a little bit dumb because they're learning new things, so they're sort of helpless, I guess, as they learn, and that has been apparent through the last 2 books in this series. So it'll be interesting to see if that still happens in books 3 and 4. The next one that I picked up was Vevensong. This was an arc by Jonathan Naves Myers, I want to say, and it was one of the most unique dystopian fantasy sci-fi novels that I've read in a long time. This book was dealing with a premise of grief and anger, and I won't go too much into Vevensong because I do have a full review coming out for that one. I think next week it will be on the Thursday, so Thursdays will generally be the reviews, but this was one of the most unique things that I have read. If you're looking for something to challenge your brain a little bit, it is quite bloody, it is quite brutal, it does deal with this idea of grief and anger that comes from grief, but the messages inside were well worth it, and I had a good time with it. It was one of those books that did get a little bit dense in some parts, so I had to read a few things more than once to make sure that my brain got it, but it was a 5-star read for me, so that's got to tell you something. I don't give those 5 stars out very often, but I actually have 2 in the month of February. Moving on from there, we have Dragons of Autumn Twilight. This is the first book in the Dragonlance Chronicles series. So this was interesting. I read this probably 10 or 12 years ago when I was first in university or the end of high school, somewhere around that time frame. It's been a long time since I read it, and I I remember really enjoying the first book, but then I never went on to the rest of the series. I was warned going into it a decade later that it hadn't aged all that well, and when I first picked it up, I wasn't sure what people meant when they said it hadn't aged all that well. And then the further that I got into it, the language style, some of the narration style is a little bit dated. A little bit of misogyny in the book. There's some racism and xenophobia in the book as well. So there are some themes in there that are outdated. I had a little bit of trouble with the thinking of it as a cohesive story overall when I went into it, and it is written like a D&D campaign. You are thrown into the mix with a ragtag bunch of people going on a quest. You basically just start with this quest. But I do think quite fondly of some of the characters in the book. I remember, thinking very fondly of Tasselhoff, who's a little bit of a ratbag, and also Raistlin, who is a sickly mage with a temper, but he is definitely the darkest and probably the most interesting of the bunch. I will say once we hit part 2, the book flowed a lot better for me, and I did enjoy it for what it was, but it is dated. So I think I gave that one about a 3. I think I gave it a 3 out of 5. Just enjoyable for what it was. I don't know that I'll ever go back to that series once I've finished the original trilogy. I might continue on with Dragonlance as a whole, but I don't know that I will go back and reread the first trilogy ever again. I just want to get those stories under my belt so that way I can continue on with Dragonlance as a bigger entity. And I have heard that the second trilogy, or the second series of stories, is better. So we'll see when I get to that, but I am still looking forward to Dragons of Winternight, which is book 2, and I'll be doing that one on audio because sometimes if things don't work for me all that well physically, they will work for me via audio. So we'll give that a go and see what we think. My review copy of the month was a book called Godina. This was by Stepan Kobets, and it was a fast-paced military sci-fi action novel. This book was fine. The narration style and the storytelling style was very much tell and not show, and I have had conversations with the author about this. He has asked me to read the first 5 chapters of book 2 to see if I can provide some input going forward into the editing stages, and I said yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of respect for this author and how he goes about talking to reviewers, and we've had really good conversations with him. He's such a lovely guy. The story itself is a very easy read. If you're looking for some bookish popcorn, it's simple, it's easy to understand, and it reads quickly. But just know that it's one of those stories that you might come away from and not think about again. And that's what it was for me. I actually did need something that was very simple to go in between reading The Great Hunt, which I'll talk about in a minute, and it did provide that sort of relief while my brain was trying to keep up with a much bigger story. So there is a character in Godina named Kerr, or Kier or Kerr, depending on how you pronounce it, which I am genuinely interested in seeing what happens. This was bookish popcorn, like I said, fast, kind of fun. The storyline itself was fairly simple in my opinion, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if you are looking for that quick, easy read. There will be a full review coming out later this month where I go a little bit more in depth of the criticisms but also the praises of Godina, because it was an alright time. But like I said, I gave it a 3. Moving on from there, we have The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, book 2 in the Wheel of Time. Now I will say that while book 1 had a phenomenal amount of world building and foreshadowing for the series, The Great Hunt made me more invested in the plot and the characters themselves. So I was a little bit worried at the end of book 1 that I didn't really care about anyone, and then at the end of book 2 I now have some feelings towards some of the characters. So we are sitting a lot more in Tar Valon. Our group sort of splits up a little bit and we get to see how Rand interacts with Mat and Perrin and a couple of other characters, and we also get to see how Nynaeve and Egwene sort of interact as they start to go on their journey. And then I think Moiraine is largely like a side piece for this book. She's sort of there underlying some things, but she's not super present. It is getting to know these young people who have all these prophecies built around them. I still think Rand is annoying as hell, and I don't know that that's ever going to change. He annoyed me in book 1, he annoyed me in book 2, he annoyed me in the show, which I didn't hate, but everyone else does. No, not everyone else does. I won't speak for everyone, but lots of people who love the book series didn't like the TV show. But I watched the first season first, so I was like, it was fine. I am going to read the third book physically, and see how that changes, because I do think that I missed some things in listening to the first two, so we'll see how we go. But overall, The Great Hunt was great, and I think I gave it a 4. The last book that I just finished up for the month of Feb, and this is going to be, it's a gloss cover, so we're going to be glary, is The Way of Unity by Sarah K. Bolstrop. This was friggin' brilliant. It's no secret that I love a deeper conversation around religion, and I love religious themes in fiction because I think there is so much to unpack, and no matter how many times the same thing is unpacked within the stories, I love it every time. This book really digs deep into how religion can be used as a fear-mongering tactic, and I just thought it was stunning. It is vivid, the prose is brutal but pretty, and the characters were unlikable but still written in a way where you could sort of see where the motivations came from. We're largely following a character named Sabella, who is part of the first heresy against the intercessors, who are the be-all and end-all of religion. They basically the ruling class, and Sabella is a young girl when we start this book, and part of the Scalans, who want to rise up against the intercessors, thinking that they've been in power for too long, and some of the ritualistic sacrifices and things like that, they're unnecessary, so they want to overrule them. The intercessors catch wind of this and basically attack Sabella and Sabella's family. Without going too much into detail, there will be a full review of this one as well, where I go way deeper into the thematics of the book. But it's then a story of how her prior beliefs now meld into revenge and wanting payback of this religious entity that she deems as being too much, essentially. And it was just fascinating. It is one of the only books that I have read for more than an hour at a time. I've got a very short attention span, and I tend to need to get up every 20 minutes, but I was sitting there reading that for hours because I could not stop. And it is something that I will definitely revisit in the future. I think there's such a good conversation to be had there, and if you can't tell, the review, I'm going to try and be fairly diplomatic, but I did love the book. Those were the things I read in February of 2023. What was your favourite read for the month? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will. I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.